Welcome everyone to today's Chat and Learn. In just a couple of minutes, we will be starting today's session. And you can definitely tell me about how's your day going and how are you feeling today in the chat. We'll look forward to interacting with you in the chat and just tell us more about you. So in the meantime, before we move forward with the session, I'll do a quick bit of introduction. My name is Sanmay. I am the program manager for the APAC region here at Power2Fly, and I'll be a moderator for the day. Having said that, today we will be discussing on how to build products with diverse audiences with mind with Jill Quek from Automattic. So welcome, Jill, and to all of our audience, just hold your horses. We will be introducing Jill in a moment. And with that being said, before we move forward before we move forward to the exciting parts, let me just keep you through some of the basic housekeeping stuff. I know, all of us have been living in the Zoom bubble from the last 2 years, so all of this, but just spare me a few seconds to go through all of this basic, boring stuff before we move to the most interesting, meaty part. So, all right. If you want to participate, we definitely urge you to turn your cameras on and, kind of unmute yourself and ask your questions away. But if you're feeling particularly shy today, don't worry. We are inclusive of that as well. And, you can definitely use the chat box to engage with us. Also, this is being recorded, and at the end of this session, we will be sending you an email with the link of the recording. By the way, write in the chat if you have any queries, any questions that you want to ask Jill about. Feel free to use the chat box, or if you're feeling particularly brave, use the raise a hand feature that's available on the bottom bar of the Zoom to kind of raise your hand, come off mute, and ask the questions to the one and only Jill herself. And also moving forward, keep up on the social with us. By the way, if it wasn't on social, was it even real? So, tag Power2Fly, tag Automattic, and, just let the world know that you were here and, you conversed with us. So having said that, now that the boring part is over, let us introduce our amazing speaker, Jill. Jill is a lead product designer at Automattic, and with more than 11 years of experience in designing, she has led teams to design for global scale, most recently working on channels for the 4+ million stores in WooCommerce. And folks who do not know about WooCommerce, it's an amazing open source platform that that helps you to build, scale, and manage your online e-commerce businesses. She strives to create useful products that are inclusive, intuitive, and delightful. And this is just a brief description, and there's so much more that we'll talk about. So welcome, Jill. And we are so honored to have you here. So before we begin and before we move further, we'd love to know more about you and your career journey so far. So take us away.
Sure, I'd love to share. Thank you so much for the introduction, Samaya. So yeah, I work at WooCommerce at Automattic. Before that, I was working at Zendesk, which is like customer support software. And prior to that, I was working with a bunch of different like startups and brands. So I really love designing, obviously. And I love talking about this topic. So thank you so much for everyone who's joined us here today. I'm really excited by the questions that y'all submitted, and let's get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill, for that introduction. So before we get started, these are the 3 main takeaways for today. 1, there will be practical ideas to enable an inclusive design process. 2 would be tips on laying the groundwork and motivating your team to design for diversity. And the 3rd one would be the importance of having a diverse team to create diverse and accessible products. And having said that, let's jump right in to the questions. So, Jill, we have got, our audience has pre-submitted a host of questions, and I'll start with one of those. So, when did you first realize that, building products focusing on diversity was a must? And, I would love to know more about your experience on that.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you to whoever asked it. So I'll give you like my personal selfish answer and then I'll tell you like my good designer answer. Okay, so my personal selfish answer is that when I was 50 and I actually almost went blind, so I had emergency surgery. I almost lost my eyesight. So I would not have been, well, it would have been very tough to be a designer if I was blind, I think. But yeah, so it was really a very scary moment in my life. And I think about that often, which is like at that point, if I had lost my eyesight, what would my experience have been with daily life, the apps that we use, the digital experiences that we have? I think about that a lot. And so that's my kind of selfish motivation where, there is always a future risk to my eyesight. It's something that I have to maintain. It's something I have to like have checkups on. It's something that needs like medical attention often. So I see okay, but it's always something that's at the back of my head, which is like, if I do lose my eyesight one day, what is that going to be like? What is that going to be like on the internet? What is that going to be like using my phone? I think about that.
Mhm.
So that's my selfish reason. My good designer reason was once we at the previous team that I worked on, we used to visit these customers, and it'll be like fancy users who have like standing desks, big monitors. And one day, so it was customer service software. So one day we visited a team in Manila, and they were like a call center. It was like a third party call center, and they had like these tiny laptops. They're not allowed to bring in their phones. They're not allowed to like touch anything. They're not allowed to have like different tabs open. All they do for 6 to 8 hours a day is like stare at the product that we built. And I think that for me, as a designer in my working experience was like a kind of a eye-opening moment where I was like, yeah, what I perceive our users to be can be very, very, very different. They're definitely not going to be like exactly in the same like setup as me. And you need to take that into account. You need to have that in mind when they're using your product. What's their physical space like? What's their workflow like? What's the environment like? What are they feeling? Yeah. So that for me was kind of a moment where I was like, you need to take a look outside yourself for sure whenever you're designing products. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Absolutely, Jill. And I'm amazed to know that being born of such, you have an experience of being a person who the requirements of inclusivity in the design process. You have seen that process from the beginning. We, as you mentioned, you had some trouble with your eyesight, and the problems that people face in the beginning, and that must have helped you in inculcating all those design nitty gritties that that help propagate diversity into this process. So thank you for that answer. So we have got another question, which is, how would you describe an inclusive design process?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think as designers, we have like this obsession with like creating the perfect design process where we're like, oh, we gotta like, oh no, don't, empathize. You gotta like research. Oh no, don't research. You have to like validate. And so we try to like create all these pieces to like
Mhm.
refine our process, which is not a bad thing, of course. I'm a fan of like design processes, but I always feel there's so much tension with like the restrictions that we have, the timelines, the scope, yes, great. I know you want to do a big research project, but we have to ship it next week. So, let's skip that whole like research part or whatever. So I think for me, there's a couple of things that I think have really helped, no matter what kind of constraints I'm under, which I think often we are under constraints. So number one is I think to always accept that there are things that I don't even know that I don't know, that there are perspectives that I cannot even fathom I haven't heard, and to always remind myself of that, even when I feel like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing, like, oh yeah, I know the user, I think I can make good decisions, but like I try to challenge that in my mind as much as possible, and to really question that to myself. And I think that has been such a helpful thing for me to always make sure that I'm listening. So that's my tip number two, which is like, listen as much as humanly possible, even when you don't have the time, even when it seems like a crappy source, even when, you just don't have like the primary research. If you can try to take the time to listen, and it doesn't mean you have to do whatever the person says, but like just take the time to absorb the perspective, it can help
Mhm.
so much. So I think that to me has helped no matter what kind of constraints I'm under.
Absolutely. Also, Jill, it's a totally different ball game if somebody is creating a product from scratch. But there are some products which have already been built, right? So how can we relook at the design of those products from a diversity lens? And what are the things that we should look into, or how can we modify some existing product and inculcate the aspect of diversity into it?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It's very different. That's a great call out, which is it's very different if you're building up a product like as a startup or like you're focused on a very specific segment of users versus if you are trying to build for scale and you're trying to build for literally everybody. I think those are very
Mhm.
different situations to be thinking about like inclusivity in your product. I would say one thing that I did want to mention is having a team that tries to be as diverse as possible, which is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to say, like, let's hire everybody from everywhere. That's a very, very difficult process in and of itself. But I'll give some examples of like how that has really helped our team. So like once when I was doing, there was like an illustration project for like like a startup related thing. And someone had drawn an illustration of like a Chinese takeout box. So it was about startups. So they had related it to like San Francisco tech scene, Chinese takeout box with like the chopsticks sticking up at the top. So I don't know how many of y'all know, but that's quite a no-no. Like in Asian culture, that's like you're offering that to your ancestors or whatever. And they were about to ship it. They were about to actually publish it and launch it across Southeast Asia and China, which is like the exact places I think it wouldn't have been received very well. Yeah, and I happened upon it just as it was about to be released, and I was like, oh no, I think we need to change its graphic for sure because yeah, I don't think that's going to be received well. And that was just something that never would have been seen. If I hadn't been listen, not like I'm saying like, oh, I'm so great, but like in this very specific situation, it just would never have been seen. And it happens so many other times, right? With people with different perspectives, different cultures, they're coming into a thing and they're looking at this product from a global lens. You're
Yeah.
going to have a different perspective. Everybody's going to have a different perspective, and that's so valuable and that's incredibly useful when you're building a product for global scale.
Absolutely. And sometimes there is an unconscious ignorance which is, rooted in it at sometimes. And, people are not conscious about the decisions. But, as you said, it was a small decision that you looked at some graphics and you realize that, it's maybe, it's not the right time and it wouldn't work well with a certain audience. So there must have been some times where you face some challenges while trying to inculcate diversity or the diverse perspective into a product. So what were those challenges, and how did you overcome this?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that happens more so. Actually, that's not true. I was going to say it happens more so with like big established projects, but I think it's the same. No matter what kind of product you're designing, I think that it's always difficult to design for what is perceived as the minority. And I think that that's something that is a very interesting thing where it's perceived as minority, right? Let's design for the majority even though it may not be the majority, it may just be the familiar. And if you're asking like majority of what? Majority of the world, majority of the earth, majority of the people who use our product, the majority of the people who could use our product. Defining the majority is a very difficult thing to define. And I think often it just becomes we're gonna design for the familiar. We're gonna design for what we've designed for before. And something that I think is a challenge is when that becomes like out of sight, out of mind, right? Like I've never thought about the people that I never thought about before, so I don't want to design
Yeah.
for them. So I think some ways that I've seen people kind of overcome that challenge. One way, a friend of mine had a really interesting approach to it. She forced her developers and her product people and her salespeople into a room, and she forced them to use their product with all kinds of different constraints. So she used with like keyboard only, hearing only, all kinds
Wow.
of yeah, like like some random stuff, like with like colorblind filters or whatever. And I think that jolt of empathy that she gave the entire team, it
Hmm.
was really very well. She didn't have to bring up these issues subsequently. It was just something
Yeah.
that, people thought about by themselves because the whole team knew what that was like and they understood the pain of someone who was feeling these things. And, like color blindness, that's, 5 to 10% of all users. Something like, there's that pretty famous like story about like YouTube. For those of us who know it, like YouTube, when they first launched the iOS app, the video upload feature, they realized that 10% of people were uploading videos upside down. So those who have heard this story before, don't give it away. But for those who haven't heard it, take a moment and think about that. Why did 10% of users upload the video upside down? I'm gonna give you a second. See if you can check. See if you can if you have the answer or you have it in your head. Okay, I'll give you 2 more seconds. Okay, so it was because they didn't realize that people, like left-handed people, would hold it with their left hand. So they never tested it with like left-handers. They only tested it with right-handers. So 10% of the
Wow.
population being left-handed, they didn't realize that like if you hold it 180 degrees, you would upload your video upside down. And they just never tested it. None of their team was left-handed maybe, and they just didn't think about it. And so I think that empathy piece is a really huge piece, whether it's a small team or a big team. If people are experiencing the pain or like the bugs or the troubles that certain users are going through, I think that can be a huge way to move people in the right direction of designing for everybody.
Absolutely. And I never thought about that. That's such a great anecdote, Jill, Yeah, that 180-degree, yeah, that's eye-opening. By the way, as you mentioned, that the first thing that teams should look forward to is having the company should look forward to is having a diverse team so that diversity is ingrained from the beginning. But sometimes where the teams are not as diverse in terms of representing all of us, and then in those junctures, what should people keep in mind when designing products for groups that do not represent themselves? Like, for instance, for people who are right-handed, creating a product for left-handed, or the great anecdote that you mentioned of your friend that who kind of gave some restraining orders to all of their developers, uh, create a product with a colorblind filter on and all those things. So how do you approach product research in these situations where where they're designing product for groups which do not represent the team inherently? So tell us more about that.
Yes, and I think that this goes to like one of the most difficult parts of user research, right? Which is like recruiting for the right user. It can be
Mhm.
so tempting and easy to recruit like, oh, my mom. But like that's not very helpful when you're trying to like
Yeah.
meet people that you've never met, right? And it's so difficult. I mean, I don't have like a perfect answer for it, but I would say get creative. When it comes to recruitment, today we're so connected. It's so easy to tap into communities that you've never tapped into before. I know a friend of mine who works on like a government related product, and she started working with the NGOs for specific requirements and communities of people, and just reaching out to them for user recruitment. And that was like a super creative way I thought of like meeting people that you otherwise would never meet. And I think just being, again, really, really open to just that idea that there are tons of things that you don't even know and that you can learn all the time. I mean, just the other day, well, I think it might have been Gan is one of the developers on my team, and I think it was him or it was someone else who said to me, Jill, by the way, this form field where you ask for an address, you made a postal code mandatory. Did you know that there are a whole bunch of countries where that is not mandatory? I didn't know. I didn't know that there were a whole bunch of countries where a postal code is not mandatory. And that's like a very simple thing, right? Like that's not something you would even think to test for. It's not something you would even like, oh, I want to target this like specific, different user group. It's just something that you would never know. And I think just being firstly listening to people on your team who are like aware of these things, and also just being super open to that, and just being like, yeah, there's going to be a ton of things that are going to be wrong in my design at the first, second, third, fourth, fifth pass. But we're going to get it better. We're going to, work out all the kinks, and hopefully we manage to make it something that is inclusive, intuitive to more and more and more people.
Wow, Jill, in this answer, you dropped some life knowledge as well. Meet with people that you normally never meet, and that opens your perspective as well. That was such a great answer. And yeah, I really love the anecdote, and the small learnings that you get being a designer. One, I never knew before this session that left-handed people and the 180-degree that issue that you shared about. I never knew about that. And the second one, most countries do not have a pin code. Wow, those are such subtle details that make a difference, of course, for a minority of people. But for them, it makes the confusions go away. It makes them so easier for them to use the product. And isn't that the final goal of any product, to make it easier to use for its audiences? So yeah, that's so great. All right, so let's just break the flow for a moment, and we have another question from Monalisha. What does a typical day look like at Automattic? So tell us more about that. Tell us more about your Automattic journey.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because we are a global team. We are a 24 hours online team. So that does result in some unique experiences in how we work. So for me personally, I wake up to 500 messages on Slack, and on our internal documentation tool, which we call like P2. So that's our internal like documentation system. So you wake up to a lot of words. We try not to do meetings. We try not to, as much as possible. We don't want people waking up at like 1 a.m. or sleeping at like, ridiculous times. We don't want that in general. So we try to write a lot in order to work together. So it involves, I would say a typical day involves a lot of reading, involves a lot of writing, and yeah, when I can, I love to design too. But yeah, so typically that is my day. Often I work on the daily with my developers, with my product team, and with my design team as well. So the designers may be working on different parts of the product, but we often check in to make sure that like our designs are all looking good, nothing's looking weird, we're giving each other good critique, that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's so great. All right, we have another question. What's your favorite part about working at Automattic? And before we move to that, Monalisha, and for all the other folks who are interested in working at Automattic, please view the page at Powerfly. They have tons of open positions available, and check them all out. If you have any other queries regarding any of their positions, let us know. We would be happy to help you, and just check them out. And you could be the next new face at Automattic, and this could be your click at getting a job at Automattic. So yeah. Now moving forward to Monalisha's question, what's your favorite part about working at Automattic? Jill,
Nice question, and thanks for encouraging everybody to look at our jobs page, Samaya. I think my favorite thing is the level of autonomy that we have in such a global team. I mean, and that's very, very difficult when you're working at such a scale and you're working with people all over the world. I think autonomy demands a lot of trust. And it's very hard to develop trust when you're not even like never been in the same room as each other, never seen each other in person. That requires a very special culture and a very special team that's very committed to it. So I think that's like my most favorite thing about working at Automattic, and that's a thing that's really unique about the team as well. So yeah, I feel like Automattic is a place where it's like, if you have an idea, if you have something that you're passionate about, something that you're interested in, you are very much encouraged to go and take a look at it. An example, relevant to our discussion today is I was kind of curious for myself on what it would be like to design for like developing countries, and what it would be like to kind of pivot our product to designing for communities that maybe we typically haven't designed for, that maybe require like offline mode, maybe require like low data mode, maybe require workflows for people that are not that digitally confident. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole of it. And there was so much support given to me to just like go and read whatever I wanted to read and go and propose it to the team. And subsequently, two of the designers, as part of like a design jam in the team, they even took it and they went to explore further. Like, so one of the designers, he's from Brazil, and so for him, this is like a topic that's close to his heart as well. So he took it and he went to explore for his local, kind of context, what that would be like. And I don't know, I kind of just love that. I feel like, rarely are you going to get that situation where this is not your job, like it's not part of your work at all. But everybody, when they see you have an interest in it, they're like, yeah, go, go and read more, go and learn more, go and like share what you learn with the team. I mean, I think that that's so unique.
Absolutely. And I really love the enthusiasm that you have in your face while answering all of those questions. That goes on to show, the environment and, the how much you love your job. So moving forward, let's move to the design bandwagon for once. So basically, we are, so I am from the Asian continent, and, we have our own biases, and people belonging to the North American continent, different parts of the world, they have their unconscious biases, and it's ingrained from the way that we are brought up, from the way that we have seen our parents interact, and all of those things from our societies. So how do you protect yourself against unconscious bias, your own and your colleagues, and how do you show them the perspective, a different perspective in a generous way, so that and manage the objections? So how do you do that?
Yes, that's so interesting. And I think it comes down to like a lot of like, not conflict management, but like conflict resolution, maybe, or like discussions or debates on a global scale. Because what you experience is so true to you, and it can be so different, like so vastly different from what someone else has experienced. And they are definitely right in their mind. Like to them, it's like saying the sky is blue, and to you, it's like, no, the sky is green, and it's like, that's what I've known my whole life. And I think that's so interesting, when you come into a global team like that. And I think something that I found quite helpful in the teams that I've been in at Automattic and also previously is when design teams or product teams in general have principles that they can align on and point to. So like, for example, there was one team that I was on, where we had a principle of like, we want it to be kind. We want our interface to be kind and forgiving rather than efficient. So there's kind of like a toss up there, right? Like, do you want it to make it really easy for people to edit, make it easy for people to undo, make it easy to like, double check whether or not they have set things correctly? Or do you want it to be as efficient and fast as possible? And so it's one of those things where if we could align on the idea that like, okay, for this particular interface, we want it to be really forgiving. We want to make sure people have set things properly. It's okay if it takes a little longer. We just want to make sure that they've set things up right because this is important. Then we can align on that. And if someone comes in and says, well, it's very slow, or like, well, we're getting feedback from like users, or like my personal opinion is that it should be a lot faster, that the interfaces I'm used to do not have this pattern. You can kind of go back to the principles of like what you're trying to do and what are the priorities for your users, or for your primary audience, or even the group of people that you're trying to prioritize for this particular workflow. So I think that principles in general help a lot for a team. For example, in the WooCommerce design team, one of our first principles is specifically called out, like we design for a global and diverse user base. So that does definitely help. Like, it's something that we all agree on. It's something that we all align on. It's not something that we need to discuss. And of course, when it comes to like day to day, of course, we still have to debate like priorities, scope, timeline, constraints, and all that. But we know that that is a priority for our team. If we can move directionally towards our principles, I feel like that helps a lot of the conflicts or like the tensions between like my bias versus your bias, or like what you're used to and what someone else is used to.
Absolutely. Now that you mentioned, kind of the basic ingredient of how you motivate your team to design for diversity, I'd love to, kind of follow up on that. How Automattic encourages this open-mindedness or continual learning, and how does Automattic encourage and motivate your team, or to kind of inculcate across its product? How does Automattic inculcate a design for diversity principle across all its products?
Yeah. I mean, my first like statement is it's hard. It's not like, I think we do a lot of things right, but it's not like everybody, we are like super perfect. I don't think we would claim that ever. I would say some of the things that we try to do that again are directionally resonant to me towards like designing better products, designing more inclusive products. We really push ourselves, even internally, to hear from as many people as we can. So like, for example, we had this, our internationalization team created a really, really interesting feature called language empathy mode. So what it does is there's a button, I can install it basically on my internal workspace, and I can press a button
Mhm.
that will translate my entire workspace into a different language. And I can experience how anyone from any language is experiencing the product. And they just did that during like a hack week. That was just something that was like thrown together, I think, in 2020. Yeah, so you can even like flip it, you can experience right to left. And anyone in the company can give feedback directly to the internationalization team on like string changes, on like language issues. And you know that so many languages can be so different, right? I mean, any one of us who speaks more than one language, I speak like half another language, and it's so different from each other. And so we know that even that alone, the experience of a product, if the language is broken, that's the whole thing, right? You're not going to have a good experience if your strings itself are broken. So yeah, that's pretty good when automaticians, we speak 120 languages in the company. So that's pretty useful in terms of like pushing ourselves to have that global mindset even internally. And I think when you have that internal culture, that's what overflows into your product. I feel like it is very important to start at the source, to start at the core, so that overflows.
Absolutely. So now moving into the pre-submitted audience question, what are the most necessary web content accessibility guidelines to follow when designing for diverse audience?
This is such an interesting question to me, and I don't know if the person who asked it like wants to give me more context on like what prompted the question, because it almost sounds like you're being forced to prioritize some, which is yeah, that's just a super interesting situation. So I'd love to hear more if the person wants to tell me more, but otherwise it's okay. I'll just answer from what I assume about the question. So I'm going to give a slightly frustrating answer. I think it depends on the type of app that you're building, or the type of like interaction or experience that you're designing. So I think if you're designing like a consumer app, it could be quite different from like your priorities versus like an app for kids, or like versus like business software kind of app. I would say my experience has been in business software, and what has been very interesting has been the push to align with accessibility guidelines in the context of business requirements. So like in a previous team that I was in, we had some of the biggest, Fortune 500 companies using the software, and they basically said, listen, if you're not hitting all accessibility guidelines by X date, we're going to switch to your competitor. I mean, it's a legal issue for them at this point, because they have to provide software that meets these guidelines in certain countries. So there's the carrot of like, yay, we want to be inclusive to everyone, but there's also the stick. That's like a business requirement where it's like, if you don't, what are you trading off in the future? What are the risks to your bottom line? What are the risks to your revenue that you are kind of creating for yourself by making certain choices now that prevent you from scaling up or prevent you from getting certain types of customers, especially if it's business software. So that's specifically from like my experience. Other types of software, I think generally broadly, so there's a couple of like segments of WCAG guidelines. So there's perceivable and operable. I would say generally those tend to be the ones that everyone tries to hit, just make sure it's good for color blindness. Just make sure it's good for like people who only use keyboards or people who don't use keyboards. Just make sure, people can like see and hear your content. It's kind of the more foundational stuff. But I would definitely say always go back to your product and always go back to your users. Like I could see a product that might prioritize editing or creating content in an accessible way over certain other things, over even seeing other people's content. It might be more important to be able to create your own content in an accessible way, which would be like another step beyond that. Depends on your product and what you're trying to do. But of course, the best case scenario is that we try to hit all accessibility guidelines, as difficult as it is, and it is difficult.
Absolutely. Thank you for this answer. And before we move to more design-specific questions, I would love to urge our audience to put away any of the questions that you have in the chat box. Jill would be, thrilled to answer them live in front of you. So if you have any questions, this is the time. Go ahead and answer them. I see that we have a couple of questions on working with Automattic. We will be taking that up in a moment, and we'll definitely dive deep into the interviewing process and the tips and quirks from, and you'll hear from Jill from an insider at Automattic how it's like to work there, and her tips on how you can land a job there. So before we do that, I definitely urge you to put away all of your questions, all of the queries that you have into the chat box, and we'll gladly take that up. So moving forward, we have another technical question, which is, what is your process for testing or confirming that your design is as inclusive and intuitive as you intended? How many times do you repeat the process on average before releasing, the product or the version? How do you do that? And tell us your framework.
Yeah. Again, I feel like this one, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question for whoever asked it, just because my context has been so much of like business software at a large scale, and the product release cycles for that can be so much slower. So, for example, with bigger teams, you're not going to do like, we designed it, we shipped it next week. You're going to do like, we did an alpha, and then we did a beta, and then we did like multiple betas, and then like 2 years later, we released it publicly. And like there are features that I worked on like 2 years ago that have just been launched. So there's that kind of timeline when you're looking at like big products that impact businesses. And the reason for that is because obviously people rely on your software for their companies to work. If you ship stuff that like breaks it, that's money lost for your customers. So you need to be really, really careful about the things you ship and the things you release. So I think for us, in the teams that I've been in, Automattic and before, you do have to be very conscious of that and have a long release cycle generally. So the product release cycle aside, from the design point of view, which obviously would be what I'm most familiar with, would be, I try to talk to customers at least once. It is difficult because especially business users, can be a lot more hesitant to talk to you, or a lot more difficult to recruit, rather than like consumers. You got like someone in Starbucks and be like, test my app. Business users can be quite difficult to test for and recruit for. So I do try to talk to real users at least once, like either through a concept test or usability test. I talk to them about like, again, not even really focusing on like, I'm focusing on this diverse use case or whatever, but like just thinking about, I want to know everything about you. I want to know about like all the like funny thoughts through your mind, your workflow, like interesting things that you do, whatever tabs you have open, what's going on around you at this point in time. Like, I want to know it all. I don't want to like guide you towards like a specific thing. And I think part of that as well is being very aware of like situational kind of handicaps or situational disabilities, where like, for example, if I'm hugging my kid to sleep, I'm always watching videos on my phone with closed captions on, and I don't
Yeah,
hear that sound, right? Like, and I love that, like, that is a thing that exists. Videos with closed captions exist, and I'm so grateful for that, and I benefit from that. So I think it's being very aware that like you're not targeting like a specific group of people with a specific set of like obvious needs, but you're targeting everyone, right? Like, there is no such thing as the majority. Again, there is just the familiar and the easy. The majority of us require diverse needs. The majority of us have diverse requirements. So I think really getting to the nitty gritty of like what people need is so interesting to me. And that's what really helps in terms of like informing the design and making sure that it's as inclusive as possible.
absolutely. And so adding on to the anecdote that you shared previously, that your one of the companies was creating graphic that you thought would be not appropriate for a certain set of audience. So how do you can you share some practical hints to avoid backlash or the canceling culture when targeting specific diverse audiences? It's a very meaty question and a slightly controversial one.
I
So
was
yeah.
so fascinated by this question when I saw that come in. And again, if anyone, whoever shared it, if you want to share more about your context, I'd love to hear it. But yeah, so to repeat the question that came in, it was practices to avoid backlash or cancel culture when targeting specific diverse audiences. And I was just so curious about this because my caveat again would be, frankly, I don't have that much experience with this. My experience has always been, we want to design for like literally the world. We want global scale. We want as many users as possible. So it's never been like, let's target a specific group intentionally forever at the expense of another group. It's always been like, let's target this group now. So I would say that there's kind of like there's two reasons why I think this will happen. One, which I think is most products, is we want to target like a specific user group. First, we want to find the product market fit. We want to like focus on a primary user. We want to like make sure we serve them really well. And then we want to expand to like everybody. We want growth, right? We all want to be the next unicorn or whatever, you double, triple, whatever, unicorn, dinosaur, what are we going to call it? So like most products want scale, and typically are not trying to exclude, they're just excluding for now. You know what I mean? But that it is true that, and this question prompted me to think about like, are there products that I know that do kind of intentionally exclude? And some that I thought about was like Snapchat a little bit. When it first came out, I think a lot of older people were like, what is this app? And like, why is
Yeah.
it so hard to use? And like, why are some of the design decisions so like almost counterintuitive, and it's like frustrating? And it was very intentional, right? Like, it was a very intentional choice. It was meant to make it, well, hypothetically, it was meant to make it like for younger people, and like, the older people can like stay off it, to some degree. I think that was like a little bit of the philosophy that I heard, like kind of went behind some of the decisions. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's what I think a lot of people felt. They felt excluded by it. They felt like, why is this so hard to use? Why did you make it so counterintuitive? Why is this like requires like a kid to explain to me how this works? And you see a little of that with like TikTok as well, right? Like, it's definitely targeted to like a specific type of user more so than another type of user. Younger, digitally more confident, rather than like, people who are not confident with like digital experiences. And I guess so the question to me became like, what do you do if certain types or groups of people feel excluded or deprioritized or shortchanged compared to your primary or your target audience? And to me, this was like kind of an interesting one, because it's kind of a question of like capitalism and like branding, where like exclusivity is desirable. People like to feel like they are part of a thing that nobody else can get, or like only they can, only people, me and people like me can get. Like if I'm like, in an app that's specifically for my community, in my town, in my country, I like that it's exclusive to me. I like that it's that way. And that resonates with people. It resonates and it helps you scale, right? It helps you target the people you want to scale. So it's like a question of like how do Louis Vuitton or like Chanel prevent backlash for being only for like rich people? I think they don't. I think they do get backlash. So for me, like my unsolicited career advice to the person who asked this, I think that's why it's very important to find products that resonate with you. That like it makes a lot of sense from a product like development point of view to target a primary audience. Like I do want to target this specific audience at the expense of other types of people, other groups of people. And people do that all the time. Whether it's good or not, whether it resonates with me or not, I think that's like another question. But I think as a designer, when you join a team, it's being very mindful of that, right? I think before you join the team, also being mindful of like, wait, is this product for a specific group of people or just for like this specific group of people? And if so, how's it going to scale? If so, who is it hurting? If so, what are the impacts of it? What are the repercussions for this product in the long term? And I think being okay with that decision as your career choice to some degree. But also, if you're in that situation, I think it can be very helpful to surface it, to talk about it, to be like, hey, did you know that, I mean, maybe it's not that intentional choice. Maybe your product folks don't realize the groups of people they've excluded. Maybe they're just not aware. And that is very possible. People do have their own, unconscious bias. They're not aware that like, oh, actually, there's a whole group of people that I just like had no idea really feel uncomfortable in our product. And I think as the designer, that can be your like voice as well. Like you can be the voice for those people. You can say, hey, did you know that I did this research and there are all these people who are very uncomfortable using our product? Maybe, are we making that choice intentionally? And then maybe people come to the decision and say, yes, we're making that choice intentionally. Or they say, oh, no, actually, we're not. How do we make it easier for those people that we're currently excluding? Yeah. So anyway, I really like this question. Whoever asked it, thank you for asking it.
The main takeaway from this question would be in some cases, exclusivity is by design, and they want to create an identity. They want just like you mentioned the example of Snapchat. It's for the younger age group, and they wanted to do it that way. It's not like, and it was totally intentional, and the planning was behind it. They wanted to make exclusive for the younger generation, and it was it they wanted to create an identity around it, and sometimes it's a part of the brand identity. And yeah, so I really love the question. So moving forward, we have some questions related to working at Automattic, how to interview at Automattic. So one of the most common theme of questions that we receive is basically, I belong to a diverse background, and how do I showcase that during my interviews, or how do I showcase my diverse background or my diversity or the diverse perspective that I have while interviewing for a designer role or product design based role?
It's such a good question. I think not just related to teams at Automattic, but so many teams now, particularly with COVID, right? So many teams are remote first. So many teams are going remote only, and I think so. The opportunities to work with people all over the world is there, right? And so, how do we present ourselves in such a way that show that we're ready for that type of working environment? We're ready and we're excited and we're curious about working in that way, which is quite a unique way outside of your local context. I think in my experience, where I've seen this be most successful is when people they show that they can have local roots with a global mindset. So showing that you understand and you care about your local context, as well as how that translates to whatever is the product that you're interviewing for, whatever is, the industry that you're looking at. If you're looking at like getting into health tech and you're working in like a specific part of the world, can you have an opinion, speak about how health tech is expanding in your part of the world, but also can you have an understanding of how it's expanding globally? I think so having that relationship and understanding how to communicate that becomes so important. One example that I can give of that was there was a again, nobody asked for my opinion in Automattic, but I just got curious about it, and I wrote a thing about like Southeast Asian marketplaces and like or like Asian marketplace commerce, and of course, Automattic being Automattic, they were like, "Great, go and research, tell us more." And but that was like one thing that I think to me. Was very useful in trying to practice in my brain that process of like I have a understanding of a thing in my context, e-commerce, but I also have a context of it in terms of my job, which is global and markets that are typically not in Asia. How do I like make that link, and how do I force myself to practice that exercise a little bit more, practice that part of my brain? And I think that when we, interview candidates who have that perspective, it's so interesting and it's so exciting because it's something that is not easy to do. I would say like we all are trying to practice it. It's not like, again, like we know how to do it so well. So when people are trying to do it intentionally, I think that becomes really exciting. So I would say there's two ways. If you are in a current job, try to do it in your current job. If you can, whatever local context you have, it doesn't have to be local to your country. It could be local to you, your individual experience, and you extract that and extend that into a more generalized audience, and kind of practice communicating that and practice articulating what you experience into that global mindset or like that broader mindset. Otherwise, I think another thing, like if you're not in a team now and you're just working in your portfolio, you see a lot of people do like redesigns of like existing, like, oh, I'm going to redesign Spotify for my design portfolio, which I'm not going to go too deep into that. There's like pros and cons for doing like design case studies for your portfolio. But like one interesting way, if you're specifically targeting a global company, is to do a redesign from your perspective. What would be Spotify for wherever you are? What would be Spotify for your specific context? And can you make intelligent like connections that still keep in mind the global scale of the product? Like what would be a localized version? What would you change? What would you keep? Why would you change and keep those things? Particularly when it comes to fintech, I think fintech is something that you see a lot of localized versions of things because, payments in one part of even one part of a country can be very different from another part of a country. So you get that a lot, like that skill set of like, I see a thing and I can adapt it to another context. That can be so interesting to see in a portfolio, and you don't see that much, or I haven't seen that much in terms of like candidates even looking to work at global companies.
That's so great. And I love the idea that you should transcend your local expertise into a global landscape, and you should effectively communicate that. So thank you for that, Jill. Moving forward, we have a question. How would you describe, from Analisha, how would you describe the work environment at Automattic? Is the work typically collaborative or more independent?
Good question. I would say it's definitely both, which is not a satisfying answer, and I'm so sorry. But it is definitely both. I would say I have to make a lot of independent decisions, more so than I think some other companies or other teams. If nobody is online, or like, I don't have someone literally next to me. I think that's quite different, right? When you're working in like an office, someone needs to be like, hey, can you like look at this thing and tell me what you think? That can be so easy to do. But when you're on your own, you do have to make, I think, decisions a lot more independently. And also be very aware that like people could be chiming in on your work, like in the next 24 hours, 48 hours, and then be collaborative in that way in a longer time timeline in a global way that maybe you may not be so common in like a local team. So yeah, I would say it's very 50-50.
All right, everyone. We have,
I wanted to, oh, sorry, I want to add
yeah.
one more thing. Just with regards to things about like Automattic and working at Automattic, we do have our blogs. We have a developer blog and we have a design blog, specifically, of course, for design processes and design questions. We will share the link with you after the event, I think. And we also have an Instagram where we talk a lot about like some of the work we do and some of our processes. So yeah, if you're interested to find more about the team, please do go and check out those links that will be sent to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill, for mentioning about all those resources. We are at the last stretch of this session. Last 4 minutes are left. So if you have any other questions, this is the best time to, put them out in the chat and, we'd love to answer them. Now, before moving forward to other questions, so Jill, what's your top tip for, anybody who's interviewing for any role or specifically product design roles at Automattic?
Communicate very well. I think that is one super unique thing about, I think, remote teams or remote only teams. Communication almost becomes, equally important as your design skills, which is, again, pretty unique to a very it's very hard for people to know anything that's going on in your mind. They cannot come over to your desk and ask you. So that would be my number one.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill, for mentioning that. And I completely agree that if you can put your point across and put all the ideas that you have out in the open, so that's the first step to having a great career out there. So moving forward, this is a bit of a selfish question, but why should any designer out there apply for a job at Automattic? So just tell us more about the perks, the best things about Automattic, so that people just flock into the Automattic job page.
Yeah, that's definitely our selfish question. I would say very frankly, it is a place for someone who wants to design with a global team on a global scale. I think that, and for some people, that's not the passion, right? Like that, for some people, that's not the way they work. That's not what they want to do. Not something that necessarily resonates. If that is something that you do want and it's something that's important to you, then yes, you definitely should apply to Automattic's design team, because we do great work with a fantastic global team on a global scale.
Thank you, Jill. And since we have just a few more minutes left, let me just take a moment to show you how you can apply to Automattic's page. So just give me a moment. I have a couple of tabs open. I'm so sorry. So just head over to Power to Fly. You can go to powertofly.com. I hope you can see my screen. Just give a thumbs up if you can. Thank you. So just head over to the companies page, companies tab, and just type Automattic, and you should be there. Just here, they have 84 jobs, out of which 71 are remote. So just head over here. You can see our conversation happening over here, but just head over to the jobs pane here, and you should be able to see all the jobs. You can use the search feature to kind of filter them by your experience level or your location, and just apply to them, and just hear back, just interview with them and get to work with Jill's team if you are a product designer. So yeah, please follow all these steps to get to the Automattic job page and apply to all of their awesome roles. Having said that, thank you, Jill, for conversing with us and letting about how you work and the inner workings of your mind. So we'd love to know more about our further takeaway, that all the participants should have from the session, and how can they further connect with
you. Yeah, thank you so much for this session, and thank you, Samaya, for moderating. And I really appreciated all the fantastic questions that were submitted. So thank you everyone who asked such thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. This was really to see, how designers continue to push this forward, how designers continue to try and challenge some of the assumptions that we have, the biases that we have, and the assumptions and biases that exist in our teams. I think that we're so well positioned to do that. We're so well positioned to be the voice of people who maybe aren't heard as often, or who maybe can't speak up for themselves. So I really love that we have that position as designers, and I hope everyone learned something new today, or at least got some funny stuff.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill, for all the knowledge nuggets that you dropped. And, I'm sure that our audience would go away, inspired and empowered. Thank you for dropping all those knowledge nuggets, and our audience would connect with you. And for all of our audience who's tuned in, you will receive the recording of this session, and all the links to all the resources that Jill mentioned in the post-event newsletter. So stay tuned and keep checking your inboxes. And once again, to the team, thank you to the team at Automattic and Jill for being part of this session. We were so honored to have you, and have a great day ahead. All right, everyone. Thank you.